What's up, founders? So I'm brighter today. I got a comment that said it was too dark in the YouTube comments, and now I'm feeling a little self-conscious. Is it too bright? Is it too dark? I don't know. We're working on the light. I want to give a big shout out to the 25,000 folk who have subscribed to AI for Founders. You can check that out, aiforfounders.co. We are one of the fastest growing AI newsletters in the world today. We've gone from 0 to 25,000 since January, and I'm super stoked. I want to encourage the folks that listen to the podcast, check out the weekly newsletter. It's packed full of news, of tools, summaries. It's amazing. We do a prompt of the week, although I feel like I phoned in the prompt of the week this week because it was just, now do what I said the first time, because sometimes that prompt works. Anyway, welcome back to AI for Founders. Today, we've got a powerhouse guest, Galvin Widjaja, founder and CEO of Loretta.io. Galvin took lessons from running restaurants in Singapore and flipped them into building one of the world's most trusted, privacy-first AI companies, working with clients like the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, TSA, and the Air Force. In this episode, you'll learn how Loretta is redefining computer vision, moving away from surveillance toward real-time understanding of human behavior. We'll dive into how to scale AI products that governments actually trust, the tightrope between privacy and security, and how empathy and resilience shape great companies. If you're a founder building an AI, SaaS, or security tech, this one's going to light up your brain. But for some business, this episode is brought to you by Kitcaster, the podcast booking agency that gets founders, execs, and entrepreneurs on the world's top podcasts. Imagine spending an hour sharing your story and walking away with thousands of people who now, like you, trust you. That's what podcast guesting does, and Kitcaster makes it easy. We've booked over 15,000 interviews for more than 500 clients, and our founders have raised hundreds of millions, landed massive partnerships, and built unforgettable brands, all by telling their stories on podcasts. If you're ready to step up your thought leadership and turn conversations into conversions, head over to kitcaster.com and apply today. That's Kitcaster by Moburst. What's up, everybody? Let me hit you with some math that will blow your mind. A wealth manager using WarmStart.ai grew their assets under management by 8.5 million in 3 months. Their monthly fee, $500. That's a 1,700% return on investment in 3 months. And I get it, another AI tool, another monthly subscription. But here's what makes WarmStart different. It's not trying to find you new people to bug, it's helping you reconnect with people who already know you. As a founder, your biggest asset isn't your product or your website, it's your relationships. But most of us are terrible at nurturing them systematically. WarmStart connects your email, identifies warm contacts, and helps you craft personalized outreach that doesn't sound like a robot wrote it. The best part, you review every message before it goes out. No automation without permission. If you're ready to stop leaving money in your inbox, try WarmStart.ai. Use code AIFF for $50 off your first month because the ROI on your existing relationships is probably better than any investment you'll make this year. That's WarmStart.ai and use code AIFF. All right, we're rolling. Galvin, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hi, Estes. Great to be here. Appreciate you inviting me over.
It is my pleasure. Now, give us a quick introduction and overview of your company, Loretta.io.
So Loretta.io is a computer vision company that started along this path in 2019, seeing the first transformers in the wild and seeing an infinitely scalable network of computer vision. And what we wanted to do was to build a system that could describe and understand the physical world through the lens of humans. And so what our system does is we identify human behavior and intent. And we use that to track people in retail and security settings.
Amazing. So is this to prevent shrink, or what's the application?
So in the retail setting, a lot of what we do is with shopping malls to do leasing and marketing. So kind of closing the omni-channel loop is what they used to call it, which essentially means I see an advertisement, I buy a product, make sure that the people who see the advertisements buy the product. And in security, then it's a bit wider than that. So in security, we work with TSA and Homeland Security and special operations countries in a couple of countries. And essentially what we do is we anticipate people with malicious behavior so that we can look out for them and kind of get them a kind of a T-1 identifier of when something is about to happen.
Unbelievable. Okay, so the business model is built for security and retail as far as like reducing shrink, reducing theft, reducing any kind of crime intention. The purpose is to like stop problems before they start.
That's exactly right. And I think the way that we think about it is hundreds of AI solutions that can detect a crime happening in real time. And can you build the system that can detect the crime about to happen a minute or two beforehand? Because that changes the narrative both for the would-be criminal, but also for the security people involved.
Amazing. Okay, I could see that this is high need, high demand. Talk to me about the technology and exactly what AI and what AI's role is playing with AI vision.
Yeah. So I think this is a very important thing to understand, and I think it's also the driver of how this business has lasted for so long. So in 2017, 18, 19, when we kind of initially incorporated, there were about a dozen computer vision companies in Singapore. They were all AI for X, Y, and Z. And currently, we are one of two that are still alive, and the other 10 have disappeared. And one of the reasons for that is the way that we thought about computer vision, right? So there are a lot of AI solutions out there, which I kind of call thin AI. By thin AI, I mean the product itself is the output of the algorithm. So the algorithm detects fight. It has fight detection AI. And great. And the thing about fight detection AI that we saw then as a practitioner, but has become more and more true every year, is all of the work that you have done to make your AI 5% better than open source and gather your data set that is 5% better than the public data set. All of that improvement was completely superseded by the thing that is GPT or the future model or the new AI model, so that a person coming in 2 years later with none of your information and data and background could build a system that is comparable to the system that you built. And so instead, what we did was we believe that to build a sustainable business, the AI has to be a foundational component. And so what is the technology behind Loretta? It is not that we detect anything better than you. It is that we first re-identify. So that is to track a person in one camera is the same person as is in the other camera, non-biometrically, which means I see you from the back. If I see your pants, you turn around, I can see your shirt and I say, this is the pants of the guy. This is the shirt of the guy who was wearing that pants previously. And so by doing that, we take that as step one. Step two, we take that and build it into what we call an entity model, which is in a building with 300,000 people, we have 300,000 end-to-end narratives of a journey. So 300,000 people taking a journey through a building. And so we take that journey and then we use AI to augment that journey with more and more data on your behaviors and things that you do and the things that you shopped at, places that you shopped at, the places they looked at, the people that you're with. And then we build our services on top of that data. By doing that, what we know is 2 years ago, we have the best re-ID or tracking system. Maybe 2 years, maybe 5 years later, that system will become widely available. But if a person comes in then with that system, they don't have the information and the knowledge built on top of that could not have existed if you didn't have the system earlier. Right? So that's kind of the way that we have looked at things.
Incredible. And you said, when was the company founded?
So company founded in 2017 as a full service like IoT business, became a pure play AI business in 2019.
Cool. Amazing. Now, in that we're 2025
Yeah.
now, when does the timeline for Minority Report kick in?
So as a company who has investors who think about stuff like that, I cannot give you too much detail about it. But one of the things that I can tell you is that we built the company with this philosophy that even there 5, 6 years ago, we thought like, okay, everybody's gonna turn us into the Minority Report company. We kind of have all the capabilities to do exactly that. The only thing we don't have is the three blue ladies floating in the water at the back. We only have one lady so far. We need to get another two. But um, essentially, what we decided was you can, if our company succeeds, it will decide how surveillance is done, or at least how much surveillance the world is going to accept, right? And so we built a solution that is end-to-end 100% non-biometric. That is to say, it's built in such a way that until you cross the same line that you already crossed if you're a criminal and then the police can take action against you, if you don't cross that line, we will give the government or the police force no more data than they already have. In other words, everything about you gets removed until the moment you are a criminal. Okay, maybe once you have crossed that line, maybe your experience will be way different, right? But before that, for the rest of us, let's do nothing. And I think that was a very important decision that we made. It was a decision that we made that made us lose battles for contracts throughout every single year. But I think over the long period will allow us to win the war. That is kind of major narrative behind that.
Yeah. How long do you keep the data?
24 hours.
Really? So it's quick. Yeah. It's interesting. It reminds me of a couple of things. Minority Report is low hanging fruit, of course. People don't know it's a movie that takes place in 2054. So it could be spot on where they're able to have, what was it called? Precog,
Oh,
where
yeah.
the cops would know you're going to do a crime before you do, and they'd arrest you
Right.
first. But it also reminds me of a great Radio Lab podcast episode where they talked about, I think it was, I believe in Fallujah, where they just basically flew drones 30,000 feet above the whole city and just took video of everything. So then what could happen is now essentially you have a time machine that can go back in time. So if you see, for example, like if there's a roadside bomb that goes off, well, they just start rolling back the camera so they can see, okay, last night we see characters that planted the bomb in the road. And then you go back further and you say, oh, okay, they were at this house and they met with these four people. And then you can then you speed up the camera to be like, okay, well, where did they go afterwards? And they can start tracing them down, So and this is like fascinating stuff, but it really, really creeped people
Yeah.
out. Like they decided that they're like, I don't think we want, this kind of fidelity. It could be an intrusion of privacy. So when you're thinking about that, how do you see like the I don't know, the temperature of public opinion to kind of embrace some of these, a little bit more intense AI driven surveillance techniques?
It's such a difficult question because the problem with these systems is that you only need to have a few inroads and then it gets normalized. And then essentially you can change public opinion one step at a time, kind of like how Uber made everybody comfortable in entering people's cars over the last 20 years, right? And so
Yeah.
there are always locations that are willing to do this. Now, living in Texas, where I live today, I live about half an hour away from the only, I'm not going to tell you the name of it because I don't want people to Google this, but the only school district which allows teachers to open carry.
Man, Texas is wild.
And I also know one of the security people who was like, we also admit that at least 9 out of 10 teachers are gonna panic if there's actually gonna be a need to use that gun, and they're gonna like probably like shoot themselves in the foot. Like there's no way that this is a great idea. But
Yeah.
there are always pockets of sentiment that will normalize these things, and then you have to make a decision how to move forward with it. Um, the way I think the way that we've seen it is that for better or for worse, it is getting normalized. And the part that I'm far more frightened about is less about the surveillance, because I see surveillance or the information coming into the network of these things, of like knowing behaviors of things that are happening in the space, as often being a net benefit. And the reason for that is whenever a police officer stops a vehicle, and if you are driving, this has happened to all of us, right? Officer has stopped the vehicle, and if you take 100% of what they have in their mind in stopping you, I would probably say it's like 20% what they saw, 50, 60% their preconceived notions, which are where things like stereotypes and biases, and this is the place that I am working on today, and 20% how they feel today. That is kind of what's making up this 100% that stopped you, right? And as the amount that you provide to them increases, that 10% of the edge, which is the objective truth, expands, and it removes the space for your stereotypes and these things to come in, right? It is more like the framework in the mind of the investigator who is deciding whether you're innocent or guilty versus the person who's stopping on the street. That's kind of the way I think about it. The thing that is far more frightening to me is where AI is making decisions. And that is the part where, yes, maybe there is pre-cog tier data that might be available in certain parts of the world, probably not in the US, probably not today, but in certain parts of the world, yes. All the things that you saw with the drones flying over, this is something that we have been doing all over the world outside of the US for ages, right? The satellites in the sky, you saw images of like, okay, if you think of like in our era, if you look at like the WMD narrative in the before the prior Iraqi war, they showed the satellite images that said like, this is what I saw, this tanker is probably driving a bomb, etc., etc. Well, we do know now that it's not true, but the data was being captured, right? And so we know that that's there. The question is, how are we making decisions about it? And the question is, do we become good at making decisions about it faster than we give the decision making to the algorithms? And I am not that comfortable right now giving decisions to the algorithms. Like, I think
Yeah.
that there are ways to squeeze the hallucinations, but there are no ways to eliminate them. And sometimes
Yeah.
people's lives are at stake with these decisions, right? And I'm not quite sure whether we are ready for that yet.
And that might be the concern that folks have, particularly with AI, because we've all accepted if you're going to the mall, you go into the airport, you know you're on camera. You already know that. You know, we're going into an age now where all of our glasses will be wearables that will be recording everything. Everything will be recorded everywhere at all times. We're walking into that kind of reluctantly, but the benefits are so great that it's just a matter of adoption. You know, but perhaps what people are upset about is if you're talking about bias, if you're talking about bias with the police force, you're talking about bias with security, you're talking about stereotypes, you're talking about, you know, basically you're talking about like prejudice against
Yep.
minorities, you know, and the problem I guess is that AI from, you know, its inception, I'm not even say AI, I'm going to say once GPT really started getting rolling in 2022, then people are like, dude, this machine is insanely biased, you know? Like in the beginning, for example, they were if you put in a ask for a picture of the founding fathers, they'd be like black guys,
Yeah.
you know? So people are probably a little bit worried about what's the bias innately built into the AI? What's the training they're receiving? So maybe you can speak to that a little bit. Like how do you fish out the bias in the machine? Now, you and I know startups aren't built in boardrooms. They're built in the wild, during 3 a.m. bug fixes, botched launches, and that one meeting where everything almost fall apart. That's what Code Story is all about. It's a podcast where tech founders break down the make or break moments behind their products, what went wrong, what went right, and what nearly wrecked everything. Hosted by Noah Labhart, Code Story goes past the highlight reel and into the honest stuff. Late pivots, brutal bugs, and somehow coming out alive with a product people actually love. If you're in the build stage, or the scale stage, or the please let this feature work stage, I can relate. This show will speak to your soul. Listen to Code Story at codestory.co or wherever you get your podcast. Just search Code Story, it'll be right at the top. Because great startups aren't born, they're forged, one hard moment at a time. codestory.co. This episode is brought to you by MoBurst, the AI-first growth engine trusted by iconic startups like Calm, Robinhood, Reddit, Uber, and Google. MoBurst is a digital full-service mobile-first marketing agency that helps companies to scale and become category leaders. Whether you're finding product market fit or ready to accelerate growth, MoBurst delivers creative, data-driven solutions that help with scale and efficiency and impact. At MoBurst, we're not just guessing what works, we're predicting it. As an AI-first agency, MoBurst uses cutting-edge tools to analyze user behavior, adapt creative in real time, and uncover hidden growth opportunities. The result, marketing that's faster, smarter, and built to convert. From early-stage startups to global brands, we've helped hundreds of companies overcome complex challenges, unlock new audiences, and optimize every metric that matters. At MoBurst, we believe that creative thinking, advanced technology, and data are the core drivers of success at scale. If you're serious about scaling your business with precision and purpose, it's time to talk to MoBurst. Visit moburst.com and let's build something category-defining together.
So I am of the belief, and this is something that is not consistent throughout the kind of AI practitioner world. I am of the belief that you cannot remove bias from the machine. So one of the reasons why I like to come on these public platforms to talk about this now is that today, if you, for example, type Darth Vader into like ChatGPT, right? Like, sorry, Disney, for using your example, but if you put Darth Vader in GPT, what is happening is that it will first generate a Darth Vader-like outcome. And then there's this like thin layer of censorship over the top that says, oh, this is a copyright property, and it gets removed, right? And so if you say something like long plate, dark cloak, mask wearing space magician with a lightning sword, suddenly you get something that looks a lot like Darth Vader, right? So you have bypassed the censorship, but clearly that image was in that mind, right? And so now what you're doing is you have built it, you don't know how to get rid of it. Now you have to build a sensor layer over the top, right? That's kind of what's happening. I think that at least in the physical world, that whole data block, the pile of people in the AI space will know the pile or common crawl, these are the large public data sets that are the base of a lot of these GPT models. They don't exist yet. And to me, you have to get rid of all the ethnicity data, all the biometric data before it goes in, or else you will always be finding ways to get rid of it. One of the important things to remember is that even if the system is designed to be objective to today, what you are also doing is you're freezing the state of stereotypes and bias to today, the day the data set was first generated, right? So if, let's say, we have one people group, hypothetically, that came into the US maybe at a later stage or is still finding their way, right? Maybe in 10 years' time, outside AI, they have found their way. They are now 100% equivalent and so on and so forth. But the AI was trained today. And so the bias is designed in this moment in time. And this moment in time, and we know looking back at history that every time we look 20 years into the past, we're like, what were those people thinking? Right. And so we don't want the entire future to be looking back at 2025 and thinking about us as like the morons who not only were like this, but also froze our perceptions into our systems, right? And so this is this is the only way, I think. I don't think you can ever remove the system because it's pattern matching, right? And so stereotypes are also a pattern matching system. And so the same logic that makes it complete sentences is the same logic that makes it think that way about the people as it does today.
Yeah, there's something unsettling about that, but it's so common, you know? It's obviously it's horrible when if it comes out in like racist ways, but like it comes out in productive ways all the time. Particularly I'm thinking like if I was head of security for like a major retailer, you know, I just looked it up real quick, and 30% of shrink from retail comes from employee
Yeah.
theft. You know, so that's just data. So that's not saying that's a bias against your own staff when you know a vast majority, and that 30% is really half because it also says that the other 30%, another 30% is basically administrative mistakes, you know? So you have basically of all the people
Yeah.
stealing stuff in your store, half of them are employees. So, and we're also accustomed to this. You see oftentimes that the cameras are actually on the cash registers. It's not following people around. You know, now there's no data on this, but anecdotally, I would say a good percentage of outside theft is coming from teenage girls. Like, I mean, I remember in high school, all the sweet, innocent teenage girls I met were like absolute kleptomaniacs, you know? So at some point, like
I
if
would
I'm
agree
head
to
of
that. Yeah.
at some point I'm head of security and a group of teenage girls comes in, I want all the like alarms going off and going crazy to make sure we keep an eye on them. So there's certain inherent bias that we refuse to like allow for good reason, but then there's other bias that like we probably encourage. So if your job is to say that the machine will never get the bias right, we're only at as good a point as we are right now, how do you kind of walk that line, and how do you reset your data points to make sure that the biases we accept and don't accept are updated?
Yeah. So I so this is such a good point. One of the reasons why we think we're a pretty good company to be doing this is that we have a background that's very different from a lot of AI companies. And so me and my brother, before I ran Loretta, I also ran physical restaurant chains. And we used to run restaurant chains that worked specifically with the migrant population. I'm going to share a little secret anecdote that is well known only in the restaurant industry, which is that often when you want to look for the very best chefs, you go to parole centers. Yes, parole centers.
Roll.
Parole centers.
So like people like just got out
People
of
got out
jail.
of jail, right?
Yeah.
That is where you get the best cooks because everything that you
Nice.
saw in Kitchen Confidential is true, but it has a dark side. And so when they hang out and take drugs together, it also means that if one of your old employees want to complain, everybody goes to jail.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, man. Hey, I know a lot of chefs, and I don't know if they're convicted felons, but they are felons for sure.
Definitely, fellas. Um, and so one of the things that happened, so I used to work in the migrant community. This was in Singapore, by the way. And Singapore is a place where I think Singapore's drug laws are legendary in the world, right? So essentially
Yeah.
about this much is cocaine is enough for the death sentence in Singapore. It's about 9 grams is enough, right? So it's pretty bad. But um, we had somebody who um, he still had his ankle monitor, right? So he was obviously still in the halfway house. He was still on parole. He was a mentor to a lot of people in our restaurant chain. So he was a mentor to all the young staff, all the young cooks, and all the young chefs. We made it so that from 2 to 5 p.m. when the restaurant was quiet, his family was allowed to come into the restaurant to live, to hang around there and to do their homework and stuff like that, so that he could see his kids, right? And so with parole, you actually are only allowed to go to your office or your workplace and go back to the place, right? Because they're tracking you all the time. You cannot leave that particular pathway and stuff like that. And so we did a lot of these things. And the reason why I mentioned this is that I want to separate this is an ex-convict. So if there's a person who is a person of interest by default or by stereotypes, he is it, right? He had 10 years in prison. But when he's out, we want to build a system that does not look at him more carefully than it does other people. So it's not about, so once that happens, you kind of fall back into that same problem that we have, which is like, oh, we talk about how like in a black community, a white criminal often never gets caught because like all of the police people are just like looking for the black community, that the people there, and they were trained that way. And it's like, and that skews the ratios even more, right? It's like maybe there's some data that implies this, but we don't want the data to drive the decision. And so the way to do that is you have to make objective capabilities that are narrow enough that the things that we want to avoid, so racial bias, age bias, doesn't get involved in it at all. So yes, maybe I will train the system that it knows how to do theft for a person in a coat or putting stuff in a handbag. Like, yes, handbags are tuned more towards younger women versus men and so on and so forth. And so obviously that capability is in there. But if I don't want the system to have what is called in the AI space today, what I call a set detection. A set, S-E-T, means a detection that says when a person like this does that, then both of these things are detected together. And that's where it gets problematic, because then you are codifying the stereotype into the system.
Yeah. It's tough too, because sometimes statistically isn't helping those stereotypes. It's tough. It's not an easy knot to untangle, honestly. And it probably takes a lot of bravery to even give it a shot. I mean, and we kind of go back and forth to your point. After COVID, like take grocery stores, for example, a lot of them basically just bailed on the self-checkouts because they were getting robbed blind. Like people would just come in, throw some M&Ms on the thing, pay for that, and throw 3 steaks into their bag, or they were doing the same thing at like the Whole Foods over by Wash Park where I live. They basically said that none of the high school kids could even come in there anymore.
That's right.
Because they were going to the
exactly. There was a sign that said that if you were under this age, you cannot use self-checkout. It's like, what?
You cannot shop here, which is wild. But I mean, this is what happens. The line moves, so the things that we're willing to accept will change depending on, the outcome of the scenario. It's very interesting. So you mentioned you ran restaurants. How does your career switch from running restaurants in Singapore to, carrying a gun in Texas?
So it was a short jump, right? No, I'm kidding. But essentially, the way that it used to work is I had a day job that when I have a very strong data analysis narrative that goes through my life, and so it went management consulting and Monte Carlo simulations, all that kind of stuff, and then it went into banking and big data. And while I was doing this, I ran restaurants for a full 6-year period at the same time as I was doing all of that. And the way that I looked at it is that I decided to be, I think everyone who becomes a startup entrepreneur looks at things one of two ways. They either think to themselves, this is a great, there's a great gap that I can fill, or there is a fundamental large gap that needs to be filled. Like, is this a quick win or is this a slow burn kind of solution? And I was dumb enough to go for the slow burn. so, um, and so essentially the way I did it was that when I looked into this, I looked at the way that physical data was being captured. And I didn't see humanity in the data. And what I mean by that is not like is that if we were looking at AI or computer vision or in physical spaces in 2017, 18, 19, even today, most of the time you'll see here the words like footfall, dwell, words like GMV. These are all averages of people in space. It's actually more describing the location than it is the person. And then I took that narrative. I went to a couple of the major shopping mall providers in Singapore, shopping mall owners in Singapore. And I was like, there has to be a secret to how you are unraveling this data. And I learned that the secret is that they're not unraveling the data. So they're just guessing. It is the reason why a lot of the top mall operators in the world are the same mall operators jumping from mall to mall, because it is all heuristics and advice and not data that is driving rental and leasing and shape and design decisions of these malls. And I was like, that's dumb. But that's problematic. And so I built a technology specifically to solve the solution of bringing humanity back to it. Because every footfall data doesn't tell you why they are there. Are they just because people walk by a shop doesn't mean that the shop has a lot of business. It could be a lush. It smells amazing. Yes. So it's like, okay, man, like that doesn't mean anything. We need data that we can use, and that is all about what is in the customer's brain and not in their movements. And so I was like, what information could allow us to identify the intent of the customer? Funnily enough, what we ended up building, we found that identifying malicious intent is easier than identifying shopping intent, because shopping intent is very nuanced. It's like, I bought these 4 things, but I wanted to buy these other things. I saw this. I could have paid more, but I didn't. And a lot of this is subconscious to you. Malicious intent is almost entirely conscious. And so the security product is an offshoot of the retail product.
Amazing. And it might be just the entry point for all this, because as the fidelity of the data gets greater and greater, and we have more data points, then there will be more buying intent that's kind of a secondary problem. So you have this great idea. You go to the mall operators. You realize that they have no idea there is an entry here. So did you raise capital? How did you finance the company in the beginning?
So I went to the mall operators. I first got, I have a bit of a consulting background. So I first got a contract to analyze their data. So this was this was how I got into the door of understanding how the data worked. That is my version of validating product market fit, right? Because there are different ways that you validate, especially if you're in the B2B space. You have to know that there are many gaps, but you don't, from the outside, you may not know whether the gap is real. So you might see, let's say if you go into a car dealership, it's like, okay, they seem to not be taking me seriously, or I'm sitting in the corner, nobody's dealing with me. There might be a gap. It's like, no, there is a reason why they're ignoring you. They're making you sit. There's a reason why you're sitting. They don't want you to get out faster, right? So they're kind of things that you need to understand, and I need to validate these things. And so I built that first. Once I got my first contract there, I took that money, I got into a property tech accelerator where I gave away 2% of the company for no better reason than to have a pilot in a property mall in Singapore. So I had a mall called Lendlease. There's a mall operator called Lendlease. Lendlease, by the way, is pretty famous in the US. Most people don't know the name, but it's the company that had the contract for the revitalization of San Francisco over the last 8 years. So,
Wow.
Contract that they did not fulfill, but there was a contract that they had.
Pretty big job. If we're talking about San
We're
Francisco.
talking about San Francisco. It was a big job. But we got them as a investor. They put us into their mall. We validated that. And then once we had the validation and we knew that the product had a value, then we raised money. We raised money in Singapore, which means we didn't raise a lot. One of the problems with raising money overseas and coming to the US is that the quantums are very different. And one of the main reasons for that is that every time you raise money, you have to have a decision of where the money takes you, right? So it's like, do I go from research to pilots, from pilots to scale up? By the time I raise the next round, am I going to be showing milestones, or am I going to be showing graphs, right? So it's kind of two ways to do it. If you talk about a seed, you can go from a seed to a Series A on milestones, which is like, okay, I got my FDA approval, I got my security approval, I got a pilot in a government location, I got a pilot in the New York Space Station or something like that, which is great. It doesn't have enough, that doesn't show that you have enough revenue, but it shows you're going very quickly in the right direction. So it's speed against milestones. Then there's the next group, there's the next stage, which is when you go to graphs, and graphs is where you just have to show revenue did this and sales did this. And once you get to graphs, then it's all performance, which is great. For companies that are building deeper and longer term, sometimes you have to step away from the take up graphs to move yourself deeper into the TAM. So it's like, I have a product that's a $10 million TAM, and I'm going to scale it up into a product of $100 million TAM. Then I'm going to scale up to a product of $1 billion TAM. And so we decided that we wanted to go deep. And so we wanted to make small jumps deeper into a scaled and more mature product, and do that while we were going there. At the same time, with an AI product, one of the key things that you need to realize is that you're moving in a space with two problems that a lot of the SaaS world didn't need to worry about. One is that there are a lot of other AI providers out there, and so your competitors are fast, right? A lot of successful startups. There's a famous saying by I think Paul Graham that says, Paul Graham used to say, it's great to work in an industry where your competitors are slow, right? And so when you're in AI, your competitors are fast, and that's one problem. The second is that the technology is evolving fast, and it's evolving in a way that the way I like to talk about it is it thickens its coverage of your service. And so what I mean by that is an AI that only detects guns, for example, is not a full suite of a security solution. But if your AI today can describe a location and run an agentic model that calls the police or something like that, then the entire solution is in the AI wrapper. If your entire solution is in the AI wrapper, and all of that is provided by a third-party solution like OpenAI or whatever, where you're just sending in the images, then your own differentiation is shrinking fast against a new incumbent. If you do that, then your solution cannot last. And so if you're going to go and make a quick buck out of it, or you're going to sell your service as a component to a big provider, then yay. But in all other cases, you are losing relevance every day as the solution as the core wrapper expands its capability. We never had this in the past, because in the past, every API never never got out of its lane, right? So if you use Twilio, it would be giving you your SMSs, but it won't be putting in the content of the SMSs. So you still have your system that sends you the messages and so on and so forth. AI doesn't do that. And so we built a solution that's like that. We built it in such a way that we could build differentiation that expands over time, even if the AI gets wider over time. And those are, I think, fundamental in the AI space today. So yeah.
Did that influence the way you were able to raise, or was that kind of seed raise in Singapore? Was that the last check? How did the financing kind of progress?
So from once we had that check, we were able to do two things. One is that we were able to differentiate ourselves in the industry. The next check after that was from a strategic investor in the US. So we continue to do that, and we are going to continue raising in the US. The second thing that that allowed us to do is that allowed us to re-domicile and kind of scale up there. And I think one of the important things with AI, or at least with any emerging technology, is I believe that if your technology is going to scale, you need to always have one hand in the cutting edge. And in AI or in the robotic space, that cutting edge is right now in government, in defense, in military use cases, and so on and so forth. Having one head there forces your technology to develop. A lot of the reason why our competitors in this property analytic space stall is because once you reach, there's a point where your product has to match the requirements of your customer, obviously. And in many cases, the customer does not want your AI to improve. They just want your system to be more enterprise and cheaper. And so if that is your case, then the problem is that because AI is still improving, you're going to build for that particular customer. And then a new startup will be able to do your capability better than you because they were still investing in the algorithm in the past. And with us, with smaller razors as well as the razors that you do overseas, you can't do both at the same time. You don't have the budget for it. And so there's a bit of a balance that you need to make between those things.
Looking into the future, what would be a good data point for the software? Right now, you have video, you have audio. Like, what if you could be able to see people's body temperature or how much they're sweating or like their eyes looking shifty? Like, what would be a good additional biometric?
So we've looked into this more than I like, but essentially, um, the answer is that there isn't a lot more that we need to do in the computer vision sense. So the next area will likely be around standoff EMF sensors. And what I mean by that is essentially terahertz sensors, and millimeter wave sensors and so on and so forth. They are low cost, they are starting to go longer distances, and they're starting to get very good data coming in. And that is essentially the X-ray vision version of it, where it's like, okay, I see you removing an object from the shelf, and I now can use the standoff to see you putting it in your bag. So that's kind of
Yeah.
the other services that come in. And there is a contract that we have that's publicly known, and there are a couple of these that are going out up there, where the computer vision that we use becomes the agent layer for processing of other data. And by agent layer, I know the word agent has kind of been taken over by the AI world to mean APIs, but agent in the old school days of machine learning means that you attribute all data to the individual. And so it's like an individual that walks by an X-ray machine, that walks by a millimeter wave sensor or a Geiger counter even, right, which is for radiation. Our system will then say, when this person entered this area, the Geiger counter went ticked up. And when you left, it went down. And that means this guy is the guy who has the nuke in the bag that you
Yeah, he's got the dirty bomb. Tackle him. Release the dogs.
release the dogs.
Wow, this is fascinating. I really appreciate your time. We're going to do the lightning round. Are you ready for the lightning
Will
round?
do always.
I love that you kind of put the company on your shoulder. What does founder-led marketing mean to you? Why do you come out here and talk on podcasts about your company?
Founder-led marketing to me means that you embody the vision of the product and you embody the way that people will perceive the company in terms of how they will trust you and how they perceive you. And so having like an ethical narrative, having a trust narrative, having a technical narrative means that when a customer talks to us, they know that they're not going to get too much marketing. They're going to get something that we know is going to stay and has a meaning behind it.
Amazing. I love it. Who would be your dream client? Who would you really like, Walmart or something? Like, what would be your a game changer client for you guys?
I think one of the clients that I really want to get in soon is the Simon's Mall brand. And the reason for that is because malls in the US, they're kind of bad. So different. Like even in North America, you have the top 10 malls in North America, like 9 of them are gonna be in Canada, right? Like it's crazy. And so it's like this is something that can meaningfully transform the way that we experience the physical world and experience social life. And so like, I would love to have Silence as a customer.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. Hey, malls, they need an overhaul,
They
don't they?
do.
Let's say the audience of this podcast loves ideas, business ideas. What's a business that you're interested in making that would earn $1 million as soon as possible?
So I looked at three of them. I look at a couple of these every couple of weeks because I want to test out the vibe coding stuff and learn how to code on my own. And I test these out on the weekend. Um, the first one is I believe that okay, so one of the important data points, 1/3 of all open AI traffic disappeared in May of this year. Do you hear this? And it came back. It came
No.
back in August. Do you know what that was? That's called summer break.
What, summer brain?
Summer break. Essentially,
Yeah, the kids aren't using it for
essentially,
their
yeah, they're earning their money from coders, but the people who are driving traffic to ChatGPT.com are students cheating on their homework, right? But like that is the key driver of AI today from a traffic perspective. And there is an end-to-end app that can be built entirely on your lecture that obviously is going to work, right? You can transcribe the lecture, you can translate the notes, you can reference that to your textbooks and your homework, close it out, and still have a system that you can ask questions to. Essentially, you can get your tutorial entirely on an agentic AI model. That will run $1 million in a weekend for sure, right? So that's one of the things that clearly would work. The second one that I think is really interesting is I like the idea of using computer vision as a assistance tool in the physical world. There was a interesting image I saw online that I absolutely love. It was the parent of one of those like AI scientists, and she used ChatGPT to identify a book on the bookshelf. And literally, you can take that system, and that means to me, you could take your little recording, whatchamacallit they have there, and say, I'm looking for something. And then if you scan the room, it'll take the photos and it will come back to you and say, I saw it. You missed it, but I saw it. And lots of things for my parents that will work extremely well in AI that are ready to go into production. But there are a lot of these, man. There are lots of them.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that, creating an alternate memory timeline
Exactly.
because our memory is so flawed. But like, if you have a camera recording everything you're seeing, it's going to pick up everything. You'll never wonder where your keys are. It'll be like, oh, it's on the counter where you left them. Like, oh, I thought I looked there 3 times. Oh, you did. You did. You just didn't see it, but we saw it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Does that mean that you have kind of do you have any interest in hardware, going into hardware?
I have an interest in going to hardware. And I think for a person who is coming into the startup space, hardware is horrendously difficult to do, especially if you are in the US. My own calculations, because I've looked into this, is that if you are a US startup going into hardware and you cannot raise $3 to $4 million out of the bat, you are either outsourcing or you will not make it to production. If you were in Southeast Asia, it is about $400,000 to $500,000. So
Really?
it's about it's a full magnitude cheaper to be able to do it. And so just a couple of things to think about around there. But yeah, we are interested in hardware. There's a huge gap, by the way, and this is something from, we work a lot with the government and stuff like that, but there's a huge gap between capabilities of vision and sensing that are available in research and the stuff that we have widely available. And that gap is not price. So it costs the same. And so it's crazy that There's no one
Yeah.
going into these things.
Assuming that governments are deep into this kind of stuff, do you have any idea what they're doing, what their hardware capabilities are?
Yeah. That definitely things that they have. But one of the ones that I like to think about is I worked for a while with a person. This is a public, you can Google their website and stuff like that. But I worked for a person who essentially, there are only a handful, maybe a dozen people out there who run companies that run sensors that don't run cameras that don't go through the CMOS sensor. Do you know what's the CMOS sensor? You know when you have a digital
No.
camera, the image goes
Mhm.
in, it hits a bunch of pixels that get excited by the energy. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
And that whatever gets excited by the energy, that gets translated into your pixels. Okay, into your now, if you do that, then the amount of light that comes in is X, but the amount of it that is making stuff jump is like 1/10 of X.
Interesting.
If you just eliminated that system, you would have a camera that captures about 10 times more light.
Ooh. So does that mean it's that much bigger? It's 10x as big of an image, so you can like go deeper into it?
No, it means that you could get a clear image in the middle of the night.
Wow, really?
Oh, so there are things happening out there.
Amazing. Let's see. I'll ask you one more question. Is there anything you know now that you wish you knew earlier?
I One of the things, a lot of what I think the main thing is about fearfulness. I think fear is a core driver. Um, if we sit back and we look at some of the like startup founders in like San Francisco and stuff like that, we're like, these guys are reckless AF. These guys. Um,
True.
and there are reasons why they can, which a lot of us, those that are born in Asia, for example, who have no base, who have no company to go back to, like you can't do that. I understand. Okay. But there is um because the time factor is the most important factor in the IRR, in the growth of a company, is how fast you do things. In some cases, for anyone who has been an entrepreneur in the non-startup world, your settings for risk are completely wrong. You're far too conservative. And I was like that, and it's something that I have had to actively build and burn out of my system. That's something that, yeah, we just have to do. We just have to do this.
You think the restaurant business is
The
conservative?
restaurant business is super conservative.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things about restaurant business is that your profit margin can be something along the lines of 0 plus minus 5%. Um,
Yeah.
because I was in the quick service restaurant business, I was in the top, and one of the people who was in the top was Subway. And Subway at the time was dominating the world. Right? So like 5 years ago, Subway was everywhere, the fastest growing fast food chain in the entire world. And what he said was that every time one of the stores goes into the red because the environment no longer supports the Subway, it takes 5 stores to make that one store break even. And I was like, what does that mean? Does that mean that if you had less than 5 stores, you go bankrupt? And he's like, kind of, yes, would you like a franchise? I was like, no. So like,
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. How do you practice taking risks? Are you like out there bungee jumping and stuff like
you
that?
know, one of the things that I did this year specifically for that is that I came from a very conservative culture, and so I have like 100 like unrealized subconscious like fears in my body, like hundreds of phobias. And so my I've been going rock climbing with my wife because I'm absolutely afraid of heights.
Me too. Me too. I could never do that. Rock climbing's
I
crazy.
was terrified They were laughing, and my hands were physically shaking, and it was amazing. I was like, this has been great for my business. Really has.
That's awesome. You know, I was looking at this Reddit video. So it's like an inch and a half on my phone. And it was like this guy that was just like stacking trash cans from like 15 feet up. And I can still feel it now, like how scared
Yeah.
I am of heights for him. I'm just like, so that's amazing. Good for you. Galvin, this has been amazing conversation. I really appreciate it. Where can people connect with you online?
So you can find me at on X at Galvin W, or at my website at loretta.io.
Tremendous. Thanks so much for coming on the
Thank
show.
you. Really appreciate it.
Hey, founders, let me ask you this. Are you building with AI or getting left behind by it? If you're serious about scaling smarter, faster, and bolder, you need to check out aiforfounders.co. It's your go-to resource for cutting through the noise and actually using AI to grow your startup. Each week, AI for Founders drops a sharp, no-fluff newsletter, dives deep with expert guests on the podcast, and hosts monthly workshops where you can get your hands dirty with the real tools and strategies. Whether you're pre-seed or Series B and beyond, launching something new, or just staying sharp, AI for Founders gives you the edge you need to win in 2025 and beyond. Hit aiforfounders.co to subscribe to the newsletter, tune into the podcast, and grab your spot in the next workshop. And it's all free. Build smarter, move faster, think bolder with AI for Founders. Now back to the show.